Hi, I'm Jan Schwartz. I'm the Global Director of the B2B Institute at LinkedIn, and I'm here with Mark Ritson, our honored guest today. Mark, you're an interesting character. I would describe you as a maverick.
Fair enough.
I think that's a polite way of describing your public personality as a marketing effectiveness thinker and a marketing professor. You had a long and distinguished career as a professor at business schools, but you've now struck out on your own and you've had two very successful courses that you've been teaching online. I've taken both of them. I want to talk today about the latest one that I just took about brand management.
Great.
I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was very valuable. Having had an MBA and all that in the past, it was an interesting refresher for me, but it also added a lot of nuance to concepts I was familiar with, and it introduced a few ones that I hadn't heard of before.
Perfect.
So I'd love to start out by saying it's an interesting time for brand management. Why did you launch the course now? What is your take on the state of brand management?
Yeah, it's a very interesting time, as you say, Jan. The driving statistic behind brand management is that our best estimate puts the number of people that work in brand management with a training in brand management at around about 10%. Everyone else is kind of either unsure, making it up, or really quite confused about the whole topic. And Fran Cassidy has some great data on how many marketers are confident in their brand building abilities, and it's sub 20%. So my main driver, other than having a great course on brand management that I wanted to share with more people, was we know there are hundreds of thousands of brand managers out there or marketers that are responsible for brand, and most of them don't know enough about brand management, and in 10 weeks we can give that knowledge to them.
Great. So what is a brand and what is brand positioning? Because you hear those words thrown around a lot, but I noticed when I took the course, there's actually quite a lot of specificity to it, the way you define it.
Yeah, I think you have to be clear on what is a brand before you get onto building a brand. And in a nutshell, brand is the difference between the commodity of whatever you sell, whether it be product or service, and what you actually have. In the cliched sense, it's the difference between Coca-Cola and a fizzy carbonated beverage, between a consulting firm and McKinsey. And if you really boil all that down, it really comes down to two things. Does your brand come to mind when you're thinking about the need or the category or the situation? So do you have awareness, salience? Do you have the cognitive presence? And then if you have that, what is the image that comes along with that? And is that positive? Is that the one you want? Is that the one you would consider? And so brand management fundamentally is managing how and when the customer thinks about you on almost every level. And at that level, it becomes a very intriguing challenge, to say the least.
And positioning, often used, but often incorrectly used. In your definition, it's something very crisp and very simple.
It is, and it comes down to that second part of the brand image. Positioning is essentially the intended brand image. It's not some 12-slide presentation or triangles and keyholes. Brand positioning is the intention. It's what we want the customer to think when they think about our brand. And when you see it that way, it makes a lot more sense, and then it becomes a much more practical endeavor. Over the last 30 years, marketers have kind of run away with the concept of positioning, and it's become this soup of complicated pictures and images and concepts. In reality, if I think about your brand, what do I then think? Positioning is the attempt to try and control or influence that. And I think when you see it that way, it's a very old-fashioned definition, it makes sense again.
But it's also very much an internal tool, right? It's not something that's intended to be communicated externally.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, positioning, the concept we normally use is DNA, right? I know you quite well, we've hung out a while, I like you very much, and that's invariably down to your DNA. I'm never going to see your helical strands swimming around that create the Schwartz man and personality and voice, and yet that's at the heart of everything. And in the same way, brand positioning is the DNA. It's not something we're going to slap on brochures straight away, but it's what's going to drive how we do everything. And I think that, again, is a point that we've lost over the years.
Another thing that occurred to me while taking your course is a lot of people obsess about brand logos, but you actually talk about brand codes.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Is that just a logo, or is that another
No,
word
it's a
for
great
a logo?
it's a great point. So I call them codes because I spent a long time working in fashion for many years with fashion people. You could equally call them assets, brand assets, distinctive assets. Whatever they are, they're supremely important. A logo is a code, but a well-run brand has more than just a logo. It has a short list of, I would always say, 3, 4, 5 motifs, images, patterns, colors, which bring the brand to mind. And they're supremely important because, boiling down again, a very long discussion, we're learning now that distinctiveness, that mental availability, coming to mind, is actually probably the biggest and most valuable part of brand. I still think image has a role to play here, but it's clear from the data now that just coming to mind is the most important thing. Codes are the way that we come to mind. Codes are the way that our advertising is linked to our brand. And so I think that of all the challenges of brand management, perhaps the one, and looking at the B2B world in particular, the one that we've singularly failed to achieve the most is working out what our codes are, and most brands do have them, articulating them and then just using them in all things. And again, it sounds screamingly obvious, but most ads, most packaging, most activities don't look like the company behind them.
Yeah.
And that's a huge failure.
One more concept that's related to that, I think, is this notion of disruptive consistency, which I really love. That was sort of the number one takeaway for me.
I'm
So
glad
can
you like that.
can you share that with our audience?
So that's good, because that's one that, that I made that one up a long time ago, because like you, it was sort of like, what's at the heart of the magic? And I've worked for some really amazing brands. And I was always obsessed with what's that thing where you think, oh my God, that's perfect. And it's this concept of what I call disruptive consistency. And what it means is, you see a brand, I think, doing great work when it does something which is entirely consistent with its positioning and yet completely contradictory to the category that it's in. Dom Perignon is a great example. At the heart of Dom Perignon's mystique as this amazing champagne is that it's vintage only, And so it doesn't have non-vintage champagne. That's something that no other champagne brand could possibly conceive of. You start with your non-vintage, and at the top you have your vintage. Dom Perignon just says, no, we only have certain years, and there's years where we don't make any wine at all. Google, if Google's purpose is to share all this information, which changes on a daily basis, altering your logo on your home screen, which is one of the rules of branding, a logo must always be consistent. Having those logos that change to represent what's going on day to day is a perfect example of being disruptive to the rules of branding, but consistent to what Google is all about. So I try and engineer those things with clients. I encourage them to say, if this is what our positioning is, let's look at places where we can do stuff that everybody else in the category, our competitors, would say, well, hang on, you can't do that. You know what I mean? You really can't do that. There's some rule book here.
Yeah, I love it. It's an interesting concept because it basically squares the circle, right? You have two opposing forces that you bring together in disruptive consistency. It's great.
And that's why companies don't do it well.
Yeah.
They're either so disruptive that it doesn't make sense, or they're so consistent they don't stand
Yeah.
out. So I think that, and you don't see it that often, but in the course we go through a lot of examples where you can see there are these marquee moments where customers would recognize that's something special, and that's a key into this brand.
Ambivalence is a very hard concept for humans to deal with, right? You want
two ideas at the same time.
That's right. That's right. To close, what advice would you give someone who is early in their career or mid-career and they really want to specialize in brand management? They're really intrigued by it, but they don't necessarily know where to go. Obviously, taking your course would be a good idea.
That's your first place. But in reality, we get more senior marketers and brand managers doing it, to be honest. So probably the first place is to recognize, where can I go and work where I can actually get my fingers around a brand? There's a lot of people who want to work in brand consulting, and the reality is you don't need to do that. Management consulting was invented because most people will never be a CEO, so this is how I get to do strategy. Brand management, you don't need to become a consultant. You can get your hands on a brand, albeit a small one, and start managing it quite quickly in your career. The big consumer goods companies still, I think, are a great training ground, as are now the digital companies too. But you're looking for a place that has many brands and that you can become an assistant brand manager and then a brand manager of a small brand. Learn your trade there, And as your success with brands grow, so does your career path. And I think that's the joy of brand management, is running a brand each year and running the strategy. And your career kind of becomes a stewardship of these different brands. That's the joy of the job, you know.
Great, great. So finally, and most importantly, where can people find your course? How do they find you?
Well, you can Google Mini MBA in Marketing or Mini MBA in Brand Management. We have our homepage, although it's done out of the UK. We have a UK platform. It's 100% online, and it's essentially a course you can do if you're working full time. We ask for about 4 or 5 hours a week for about 12 or 13 weeks, and we find that our marketers and managers just about manage to squeeze it in. And so if you go online, you'll find Mini MBA in Marketing and Mini MBA in Brand Management, and we would love to have, you know, more people doing the course.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.